A new Pokemon game came out recently, and, like every time a new game comes out, we've had a bunch of nice, calm, civil discourse about the game. So, yeah, about everyone and their mom has an opinion about Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. But, as far as we're concerned, this is my channel, so I don't care about them. Let's talk about my opinion. And one quick thing before going forward, I know these games just came out, so out of respect for those who haven't finished the game or have yet to play the game because they're waiting for Christmas, I'm going to try to limit the extent of the footage that I show. I will not show any content from the final dungeon of the game or the final battles of any of the 3 routes. So with that out of the way, what is my general opinion about this game? So I think I'd say, if I had to condense my opinion to one sentence, is that while this game has some clear and blatant issues, it is the most fun I have had with the series in a good while, and is a really good direction for the series from a game design perspective. So first off, let's start about where I think this review needs to begin, and that is the performance issues about the game. This is by far the game's weakest point. At this point, most of you have probably already seen the videos that have flooded the internet showing all these various graphical glitches and just weird goofs about the game. And honestly, they are pretty entertaining to watch, so I understand why they're everywhere. And these glitches are common enough and to the point where several reviews highlighted the game's performance as an issue. And as you might expect, a certain camp has sort of made this the focal point of the discourse. And to maybe highlight the extent of what that discourse is like, when you have the fucking Washington Post publishing articles about your game's performance issues, you know it's bad. That all being said though, a lot of people have been somewhat overstating the extent of these performance issues. In my experience, these issues are not a super frequent occurrence. The game is perfectly playable by all means. Plus, most of these glitches are just kind of funny. They don't like break the game in any way. So like, I'm having some fun with this. I think it's mostly harmless fun, but yeah, it's still not great that it's in the final product. So overall, my most frequent issue was mostly just the game dropping frames, especially in the rain, it seemed like. It also doesn't seem to like a bunch of grass for some reason. When the game lags like that, it does also seem to slow down the game, but I can't actually tell whether or not the game is actually slowing down when the frame rate does, or if it's just my perception. Either way though, the frame rate is not great. Thankfully, players have seemed to have already found a bit of a workaround that involves closing and restarting the game that seems to help alleviate the performance issues somewhat. And obviously this is something that you shouldn't have to do, but at least there is a means to fix these issues with the current state of the game. Ideally though, Game Freak should release a patch to sort of improve these issues. Beyond just the issues with the frame rate, the draw distance in the game isn't too stellar either. And it leads to some pretty nasty pop-in at times. It's not quite Xenoblade Chronicles 2 level of pop-in, where the textures aren't fully loaded when the game gives you control, but it's still pretty noticeable. The biggest thing I noticed was shadows seem to pop in and out during gameplay. And these issues do hamper the experience a bit, but again, they in no way break the game to the point where you can't finish it. But with all these issues floating around, it has led people to discuss maybe what the exact cause is. The first thing that people decided to blame was just the Switch itself, with one article going as far as to say that this justifies the Switch 2. God, people are so desperate for a Switch upgrade that they will find any reason to talk about it. That being said though, this is not entirely on the Switch. Xenoblade Chronicles 3 came out in July, and that game is gorgeous and maintains a steady frame rate at 1080p. Plus, the Switch launched with Breath of the Wild, so from all we can tell, the Switch can indeed handle more ambitious games. So that leads to the conclusion that this is a technical issue with how the game is coded, which leads into my next point a bit. What people have been saying is that this game's performance issues are caused by a memory leak. Allegedly. So, with a claim like this, there's gotta be a pretty good source for it, right? Right? So as it turns out, the primary source for this claim is a tweet. One from a infamous leaker known as Centro Pokemon, who states the following. Based on our testing, the biggest issue we have, the frame rate drops, appear to come from a memory leak or similar when you are near towns or cities. As stated, you can sort of note the complete lack of anyone doing a full memory profiling or providing any other form of hard evidence that this is actually the case. That, of course, did not stop this claim from being picked up by a multitude of gaming publications, in some cases without citing the original tweet or acknowledging that this is just a working theory. So, is there a memory leak? We do not know, and that's as far as we can say. All we can say at this point is that the game has some type of slowdown issue, and that players say it appears to get better when you restart the game. And that's only one example of the weird rumors started about this game, about the performance. All of that being said though, whether or not these rumors are true, the underlying point is that the performance isn't the best the series has seen. Like, even the music is glitched during the Elite Four for some players, which kind of sucks because it's a pretty decent song. I got super lucky apparently because I heard the full song on all 4 fights, but I know a friend who didn't and just had the first 5 seconds on loop for the entire fight. Oh, wait. This is gonna cause a problem, isn't it? This is... You can see through this right now, can't you? So, boy. What do I do about this? I guess I'll take it off? I don't want to, but it's like my best option, I guess. Alrighty though. So, moving away from the game's visual shortcomings, this game is still a real blast to play. The open world design really works for this series in a way that I didn't quite expect. It's so nice to see all the Pokemon running around out in the field. It just makes the world feel so alive, even when it is running at 10 frames per second. And for those of you who got used to the combat system in Legends, we are back to the traditional battle system here. So things like throwing Pokeballs in the field is gone. It's unfortunate, but at the same time, this is still pretty fun. Although, that being said, I definitely could not wait to get access to Quick Balls to make those wild battles so much easier, even when they broke out like half the time anyway still. Beyond those changes, there are, for starters, actually trainer battles in this game. And in a series first, all of these fights are completely optional. Between that and the wild Pokemon being fully visible in the field, you have full reign to pick and choose your battles at all times. There are no forced fights outside of the story. In fact, there were times in my playthrough where I just barely fought any trainers because I didn't feel the need to. I just went around and caught every new Pokemon that I didn't already have registered in my decks, and that seemed to be enough to keep my team fairly leveled throughout the experience. Also, due to that playstyle, I ended up beating the game with over half of the Pokemon in the Pokedex already registered. So, in a sense, completing the Pokedex has never been easier than this game. And on top of that, the game is actively encouraging you to do that at pretty much all times by giving you access to items for every 10 entries that you fill out. That all being said though, one small minor annoyance that the Pokemon in the field has in this game is that shiny Pokemon no longer sparkle in the overworld. I fortunately got lucky in the fact that the one that I actually got, I saw in time, and this time didn't manage to miss it. R.I.P. Shiny Starly. R.I.P.
They ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine, but you just can't get into it because they would never understand.
That still being said, this is a super annoying change that was made for no real good reason, and it can honestly make you a bit paranoid that you might inevitably miss a shiny Pokemon because you didn't see it. Because in this game, most of the Pokemon are to their actual size scale. So there are some truly tiny ones out in the field this time around. One other kind of minor annoyance with the wild battles is that Because the Pokemon still move in the background, and the fact that the game will move you back at the start of a battle to make room for your Pokemon, it's not uncommon for Pokemon to wind up inside your hitbox at the end of a battle, which then just re-triggers a new one. And that can happen over and over and over again, forcing you to fight several Pokemon that you had no intention to. Like, don't get me wrong, I like seeing all these other Pokemon in the background, but at the same time, like, just go away so I can keep on exploring, please. I already captured you like 2 hours ago. Back to other components of the game's exploration, the Let's Go mechanic is definitely an interesting addition here. I didn't use it that much, to be honest. It's a cool add-on, but to me it seemed like it was just gonna cause me to be way too overleveled, so there was just no reason I felt like I needed to do it. Still a cool concept that helps you maybe not miss collectibles by having your Pokemon get it for you. That all being said though, let's move on to the biggest point of contention with the game's exploration mechanics. It's time to talk about level scaling. So, as you might have already heard, this game does not have that. As the game stated, you can go anywhere and do things in any order, but each area still has a general level of power compared to each other. And what makes this topic kind of interesting is that A, this was never explicitly promised by Game Freak at any point, and 2, is not necessarily a universal design concept in a lot of open world games. Breath of the Wild, for one, has it, but beyond that, some other games out there like Dragon Quest XI, Final Fantasy XV, and every single Xenoblade game to be released don't do it. Now, that being said, of the games I just mentioned, Xenoblade Chronicles X is the only truly open world game of that bunch, but still, I think my point does stand here. And while this can be frustrating to the contingency of players that wanted this mechanic, it does still help to give you a sense of progression in the game. The YouTube channel Extra Credits made a point that if it takes the same number of hits to defeat a rat at level 50 as it does at level 1, it kind of ruins the sense of progression. You don't feel like you've actually gotten stronger. So in some ways, this game works better by giving you more of that sense of growth and progression. And if you want to go out of your way and try to challenge all of the higher level areas first that the game intends you to complete last, like, more power to you. That's a challenge you can impose on yourself if you so desire. Plus, on top of that, Pokemon implementing level scaling is a lot more of a challenge than in some other games, because you have to figure out how to properly update things like movesets and evolving Pokemon when appropriate. Otherwise, you're just gonna get a case like the Isle of Armor where you're fighting level 60 base stage Pokemon with early game movesets. So, like, you need to do something about that. So it's a simple solution on paper, but far, far harder to implement, and implement well. Honestly, the topic of how level scaling in Pokemon could be done could very well be its own video. That being said though, beyond just the level aspects, the game does do a few other things to aid with the sense of progression. This is where the game's 3 primary storylines come into play. Completing an objective in any of those stories gives you some type of in-game benefit. Each of these in turn working to give you a sense that you're getting stronger and more powerful beyond just watching some numbers go up. Gym badges, for example, give you access to more items at the Pokemart, and allow you to catch and control higher leveled Pokemon with ease. On top of that, the Team Star stuff gives you the ability to craft more TMs as you play through the game. However, of these storylines, arguably the most important one is the Titan Pokemon, as completing these objectives upgrade Koraidon or Miraidon depending on which game you're playing. Just because this game is an open world game doesn't mean you necessarily have the means to get to all locations at the start of the game. You instead have to unlock these abilities by defeating the various Titans, which then grant you the necessary mobility options to get to those areas that you previously couldn't. Overall, I think this continues the improvement that we saw in previous games by not having you reliant on teaching specific moves to your Pokemon. On top of that, compared to games like Sun and Moon and Legends, all of this being tied to a single Pokemon makes it a lot more streamlined to switch between the various transportation modes. Beyond just that, compared to those other games, riding on your Pokemon in this game feels so satisfying, at least when the game isn't lagging. Like, I have so much fun just riding around on Miraidon. It is absolutely incredible. That being said, the late game climbing mechanic is a little bit busted though. This definitely gives one Link from Hyrule a run for his money. Oh, you get tired when you climb too much? Is Wet Rock just too slippery for you to climb? Aw, poor baby. On aggregate though, all of these changes made to the game's structure and mobility options give you one of the best exploration systems in the entire series. Like, I am super impressed that they went there and broke from the more linear design that we saw in, say, Sword and Shield, for example. Moving on from the game's exploration into some of the more core mechanics to the game, this game is a lot more traditional compared to Legends, which was by far the most experimental game the series had seen to date. We are back to the combat system we're more used to. Abilities are back, the agile and strong style moves are gone, and we have a more traditional move selection and turn order. You also now gain experience on each knockout instead of at the end of a trainer battle, which is a super nice thing to have back, because it was really annoying in Legends. The game also restores access to your boxes from the menu now, which is something I never thought I'd miss, but turns out I do. That all being said though, this game does have a few unfortunate, how do I put this, regressions. The first is that TMs are now single use again. I know, just why? Why was this change ever put into place? So bringing Diamond and Shining Pearl was probably a bit of an indication that this was coming, but Sword and Shield also share some of the blame for this with their whole TR thing. Thankfully, at least, unlike some of the older games, there are no finite TMs here. All TMs in the game can be crafted at this machine in the Pokemon Center, which requires you to have both Pokemon materials, which are obtained from wild Pokemon fights, and something called League Points, which is essentially a secondary currency in the game that you can earn from a variety of different sources beyond just trainer battles. They can be used in pretty much all the same places as money with a 1-for-1 exchange rate too, which is pretty helpful. However, in the case of TMs, they are required. You cannot use money for making TMs. The other regression is that you can't really change the time of day here like you could in Legends. Like, this seems like a fairly basic thing to want to be able to do, right? Like, why would you take this out? But moving on from those things to some of the bigger mechanical changes, the biggest new mechanic we have in this game is by far the terastallizing system. This is more or less this generation's gimmick mechanic in the same way that things like Z-moves and Dynamax were before it. However, unlike, say, Dynamaxing, this one's a little less broken. For starters, your stats don't change at all in this mechanic, unlike some of the other ones. Instead, your Pokemon will change its type to one of the 18 Pokemon types, making it single type when it goes through this mechanic. So, how does it work exactly? For starters, you still retain your same type attack bonus from your existing types. That does not change. However, you gain an additional bonus for your Pokemon's Terra type. And if your Terra type and original type line up, you get an additional bonus, doubling damage instead of the usual 1.5 times boost. And most Pokemon you catch already have a Terra type that matches one of their types, so you can quite easily get this boost already. However, if you're looking for a Pokemon with a different Terra type, there are two ways to find it. First are these golden glowing Pokemon that start the fight terastallized and have to be weakened before they can actually be captured, and through the new Terra raids. Also, there's the ability to just change your Pokemon's Terra type, but it's kind of a costly thing to do. But to the primary way you're going to be getting these Pokemon, raids are a very interesting twist on the battle system. Essentially, you have all 4 players acting independently from each other. And instead of there being a turn limit like there were in Dynamax raids, there is a time limit here. So acting quickly works in your advantage. You also don't get kicked out for getting knocked out so many times. You simply suffer a time penalty. The AI here seems to be at least a little bit better. We don't have anything like a Magikarp or a Solrock or any other weird stuff like that from your allies. So it's almost like they knew people complained about that from the last game. Also, like the Dynamax raids, these raids have a different difficulty rating that determine the strength of the Pokemon that you're going to find there. Overall, it is a very interesting and very fun mechanic to play around with, and definitely something for you to do as the player after you beat the main game. On top of those, the Titan and Team Star battles also have their own slightly different mechanic. Titans are kind of like the totem battles from Sun and Moon, but with a little bit more bulk than those guys had. They all seem to follow a pretty predictable pattern where you first fight them in a one-on-one fight with your party before teaming up with Arven, one of the game's main characters, to take them on in a 2v1 battle. These fights, generally speaking, are fairly easy, and you can typically take them out with a few well-placed hits. Team Star fights, on the other hand, are quite a deal cooler. At first, they start off as basically similar to a gym battle, before transitioning to being like a Titan battle on their last Pokemon, with you literally fighting the car that they're standing on. The Team Star fights are definitely the most challenging of the three routes for sure. And obviously, this would not be a truly new Pokemon game without some, well, new Pokemon. So the new Pokemon in this game are honestly kind of cool in my opinion. There are over 100 new Pokemon introduced in this generation, which, if you've been keeping track, finally puts us over that magical 1,000 Pokemon. We're here. And of those 100 or so Pokemon, there's a lot of interesting designs that I can get behind. Unfortunately, a certain cat betrayed us. Thanks, I hate it. Thankfully, Fuecoco did not turn into a biped. That's an improvement. Jokes aside though, there are definitely a fair number of interesting new Pokemon. My favorite definitely is Finizen. Like, he's so cute. I just want a plushie of him already. Why can't I buy him yet, Nintendo? Like, come on, get your priorities straight. This is the ideal time to be selling cute Pokemon plushies. Give me a Finizen, please. Some of the other really cool ones include Scovillain, which is honestly the best way to do a fire grass Pokemon in my opinion. Tandemaus is also a very fun one and has a ton of memes generated about him already. By far, however, the most unique of the new Pokemon are the duo of Tatsugiri and Dondozo. Basically, in double battles, the two Pokemon more or less fuse together, with Tatsugiri going inside Dondozo's mouth and then doubling all its stats in exchange for creating a 1v2 exchange. Which, of course, if you've played Pokemon Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, you know how scary having all your stats doubled can be. But it's still a pretty cool concept that plays on the idea that certain Pokemon have some sort of symbiotic relationship with each other. There is also one last set of really cool Pokemon, but it's kind of major spoiler territory, so I'm not going to talk about that in this video. And of course, like every game since Generation 7, we've got some more regional variants. This time around though, only 2 Pokemon can truly be considered regional variants of existing Pokemon. Those 2 happen to be Wooper and Tauros. The second of which is quite fitting because the game is set in Spain, and what's the point of having a game where you go into a Spanish-like setting if you can't get trampled by bulls? Beyond those 2 though, we also have a new evolution of Wooper, Clodsire, which is incredible, super derpy, and I love him. On top of that, we've got 2 Pokemon that are considered distinct species, but look extremely close to existing Pokemon. Wiglet and Toadscool. We're gonna take a look at that latter one for a second. Like, just look at him run. Like, is this not incredible? Like, is this not the greatest thing to ever grace your screen? And obviously those 2 Pokemon also do evolve. And since we're back on the topic of evolution, we've got a few new evolutions of existing Pokemon that do not have regional forms. The best of which is the Dunsparce, the most Dunsparce evolution ever conceived. Like, I know people wanted a cool dragon, but like, come on. It's Dunsparce. Like, this is the ethos of what this Pokemon is. I love it. And of course, it can't be a truly new Pokemon game without our fair share of just complete and utter bullshit Pokemon evolution methods. So let's run through a few of them. Walking with them using the Let's Go feature, with no indication as to whether or not you hit the required step count. Reaching a certain level while in a multiplayer session with another player. Leveling up after knocking out 3 Pokemon holding a specific item. Evolving completely at random without any real indication that you're doing so. And my personal favorite, collecting 999 of a specific item and then leveling up that Pokemon. And since we're just continuing down the topic of things that are so intrinsically Pokemon, we've got some truly broken shit in this game, and it is fantastic. Smogon, in fact, has already banned several Pokemon, including the new Pokemon Houndstone. And if in case you're wondering why this Pokemon was banned, it's basically because it has a move called Last Respects, which is a just regular 50 base power move that gains 50 additional power for each Pokemon in your party that's knocked out. It is wild. And honestly, this is probably only the beginning, because there is far more in this game that has the potential to be extremely busted. So the last thing that I want to touch on for this game is the story. Overall, the story is surprisingly quite good. So the 3 stories in this game work completely independently from each other. They don't rely on having the characters from any of the 3 stories directly interact at any point, which works to help sort of maintain the open world structure while also allowing the stories to be fairly fleshed out. Part of the way the game does this is by having specific interactions and events be tied to the number of challenges in that story you have completed. So things will happen in this game not because you're in a certain city or just defeated a specific gym, but because you have so many badges. This allows the game to maintain some top-notch characterization and moments, especially in that of the Team Star story. Each of the admins in Team Star have incredible backstories that make them fairly fleshed out characters. This is an evil team that isn't explicitly evil in the same way that, like, say, Team Flare or Team Galactic are, but they're significantly better than some of those teams because they're written so well. Path of Legends as well has some really fantastic and heartwarming moments. It is absolutely incredible. Honestly, when it comes to the story, the weakest point is probably the gym challenge. Nemona just feels like a fairly one-note rival. She doesn't have as much development as some of the characters in the other stories do. That being said, though, the story is not completely without its merits. The gym leaders here have a lot of personality. This is probably the most unique the gym leaders have felt in a long time. And they do this in such a brief amount of time, too. They're not super involved in the story in the way that they were in games like Black and White. They only have their gyms to bring their personality out, and in many cases, they're just extremely charming. It's also a really nice change to introduce members of the Elite Four outside of the gyms and give you more of an indication of who they are before you actually have to go and fight them. It's something that I wanted to see for a while, and we finally get to see it, and it's done really well. And finally, after you complete all 3 stories, they come together in such a fantastic way that I was not expecting, that just leads to probably one of my favorite endings in the entire series. It was just such an incredible roller coaster from start to end once you finish all 3 stories. Post-game wise though, there isn't too much to do, honestly. There are just a few rematches with the gym leaders and a new tournament that opens up, but that's about it. There are some optional things to do here, including some legendaries that you can seek out. You've also got a few other things you can do, like complete your Pokedex, do some of the new raids that come up, or if you're so inclined, actually going to school for once, which, yeah, as of recording, I haven't done that, and I don't really know if I'm going to, honestly. Overall, though, the story is incredibly solid, especially compared to Sword and Shield, which isn't saying much, and it honestly more than makes up for the fact that there isn't as much post-game story content as some of the games that are super revered in the franchise. So to sort of reiterate my thoughts on this game, despite having some somewhat questionable performance, the game is very strong in many of its other areas. Honestly, with a few additional performance patches, this might well easily be the best Pokemon game on the Switch. I had so much fun playing this game, and I really am intrigued to see what they do for the rest of this generation. And with that, I will see you guys in the next video.